welcome back to Dearsley. I have set up this small scene in my goods yard. Later in this video I will show you exactly how I would go about photographing it. But first I will show you my camera settings for taking close-up photographs. I might have used my camera with other settings before this shoot, so first I need to run through my camera setting checklist. I don't really need to check my quality setting, as I always have my camera on the highest quality JPEG setting. First, I set the lens and camera to manual. The reason I set everything to manual is that the camera won't do anything I haven't asked it to do. If you use automatic modes, the camera will always try and average out your exposures. Secondly, I switch the image stabilizing off. I will be using a tripod and will eliminate all movement. Having your stabilizing on could actually induce lens movement, as it can't find anything to correct. I then set the ISO to ISO 100. Most modern digital cameras work well in low light, but they work at their best when the light levels are good. Using high ISO settings or long exposures can induce noise. The lowest ISO settings will give you the best results. Depending on whether I'm using studio lights or flash, I will now set the white balance. For studio lighting, I have a range of settings in kelvins, which is how colour temperature is measured, and I can choose from them in my camera. If you don't have this, then find your white balance symbol for tungsten lights and use this. If your exposure doesn't look right, find your custom white balance and set your white balance for your lights. Then save this and use it when you next use your lighting. To set the white balance for flash is easier. Lighting from flash guns is daylight balanced. You can use the daylight setting or the flash setting on your camera, and you can mix daylight from a window with your flash lighting. One of the drawbacks in close-up photography is that the depth of field is greatly reduced. If you're not going to use software, then set your camera to the highest available aperture. Mine is f/32. The smaller the aperture, the greater the depth of field. The optimum quality setting for my lens is at f11, not f32. So, when I use the image stacking software, I will set my camera to f11. To eliminate any possible shake caused when I press the shutter, I select the shutter delay option, which is normally set at 2 seconds. However, sometimes I need to keep both hands free to hold a light or a reflector. So I increase this to a 5 or 10 second delay. You don't really need to use a shutter delay for firing flash because it operates so quickly. But often I still want to use a reflector or a spare light, so I use the delays even when I'm using flash. And that's all my checklist taken care of. My camera is now set, ready to go. You may have noticed I have not mentioned shutter speed. When I set the lights up, I use the shutter speed to adjust the exposure until I get it how I want it. Well, here we are. I've set up this Baby Deltic locomotive, and we're going to take its photograph from sort of front 3/4 view, so the body of the locomotive is running away from the camera, so there will be depth of field issues that we need to solve. I've set up one light which is shining directly on this side of the locomotive to light it up, and it's placed about 5 feet from the locomotive, so it'll light up a little bit of the background scene as well without the light levels dropping off. I've got it positioned on a tripod so it's nice and stable, and it's set low compared with the locomotive to get a to give a realistic eye level. I'll want it to look as though we're looking up. I need to do one final thing, and that's to adjust the zoom and set the shutter speed to get the final exposure. I have the camera set on timer, and it'll take one photograph, and from this I can adjust the shutter speed to get the exposure correct. So now I'll take the test exposure. Well, actually 1.6 seconds was a bit too fast, so I need the shutter open a little longer, so I'm going to set this to 2.5 seconds. Okay, fine. And now I'll do another test shot. Yep, now that looks a lot better. Back to the camera, and now I have the full exposure settings dialed in. So now I'll put the shutter delay on, and now the camera, after a small delay, will take a series of 4 photographs automatically, and I will vary the lighting with a fill light while it's doing it. I'm going to be using this small tungsten spot lamp and just lighting up bits of this, but I'm going to add a little bit of light here and there. Okay, so off we go. That should be fine. Now, with everything still set up, I'm going to do a couple of other sets of exposures. The first one is to hold a piece of white board behind the locomotive and eliminate the background that's there. Okay, and then I will also try and do this and add lighting again at the same time. I'll probably lose one photo while this is setting. I'm setting this up. Yeah, there it goes. Anyway, it's in place now, so I can add lighting. And now the last one I'm going to do, the last set of exposures, is to remove the locomotive and refocus the camera. I'm going to refocus the camera on the background. Good. There should be enough there to do something a bit creative anyway in Photoshop. So I'll take these down to my computer and we can start to work. As I have mentioned, I use an old version of Photoshop Elements for all my photo editing and manipulation. I don't want my videos to be Photoshop tutorials as such, because you may well have other perfectly good software. I will share how I go about editing my photographs. If it can be done with my software, then I would imagine you could do the same with the other brands on the market. If you do need more detailed tutorials for your software, I'm sure there are plenty already on YouTube. I opened the first image I took, lit with a single tungsten light. There are obvious issues with this. The screen on the wall is easy to deal with, but lighting up the dark areas, particularly the front of the locomotive, could be more difficult. I am glad I used my small spotlight to paint some light in this area when I took the photograph. Photoshop works in layers. At the moment, the whole image is on one layer. The first thing to do, however, is to duplicate the image, creating a second layer. Using a magic wand tool, the area of the sky is selected. It becomes outlined with a moving dotted line, often called marching ants. When the delete button is pressed, the area of the sky on the second layer goes transparent. All transparent areas in Photoshop are indicated with a grey checkerboard design. The computer screen can now be selected and deleted using the rectangular marquee tool. Where the distance originally met the sky, it's left a hard edge that can be a bit obvious in the finished photograph. This can easily be softened out using the blur tool. All is now prepared for this layer. It's time to add a sky. I know photo back scenes are popular, but if you have a plain back scene, you can replace the sky with all sorts of atmospheric alternatives to give your model railway photographs infinite variety. This one looks good. I like the way the distant clouds look as though they will blend well with the distant part of my back scene. Here you can see I've added both sky images to the work. There are now 4 layers. Now is the time to turn my attention to the edge of the baseboard. This can simply be selected using a polygonal, I think that's how you pronounce it, a polygonal lasso tool. Wait for the marching ants and delete. I've quickly taken another photograph of my baseboard showing a lot more of the area near the edge. Using the cropping tool, I selected a useful area and created a patch. I removed the shadow area to the left of the patch using the clone stamp tool. Having done this, I added this patch as another layer to the main image and dragged it into position. I felt the overall foreground look was a bit too light, so I darkened it a little using the burn tool. I'm happy that the image is now complete. I have flattened it. My 5 layers are now just 1 again. If I needed, it can be further tweaked with brightness and saturation, etc. before finally adding a little sharpness. And here is the finished image. A valid photograph of a locomotive on my layout. I hope you agree. The next photograph I took was the one with the whiteboard held behind the locomotive. This makes it much easier to remove the original background to make either a deeper area in focus or in fact make a more drastic change of location. Here you can see the whiteboard has been replaced by a large transparent area, and now here is a photograph I took when I removed the locomotive. As I refocus separately for this shot, the scene is much more sharply focused. I've removed the original sky and monitor screen, the same as before, and stacked these 2 layers together with the second sky. Here you can see the order of the stacked layers. I added the foreground patch, tweaked and sharpened in the same way as before to give this alternate take on the same image with a greater depth of focus. In this last image, I have changed the location by using an actual photograph taken at Weybourne in Norfolk. I believe it will still make a valid photograph of my railway because Dearsley is virtually linked to Holt, Weybourne and Sheringham. Using the image with the white background again, I have stacked these images together with the foreground patch. The final image is tweaked and sharpened until I'm happy with it. My locomotive along the line at Weybourne. The start of this series of videos has been a long time coming. I didn't know quite how best to go about them, but now I've taken the plunge. I hope you like it. I'll be happy to hear your comments and suggestions as always, so please subscribe. Time to get back to some proper modelling for a while now, so good luck with your photography.